I'm leaving you. Victoria, tonight? The words hit her like ice water as she stood in their marble foyer. 8 months pregnant, still holding the positive paternity test results she'd planned to surprise him with. Victoria Sterling Brennan felt her world tilt on its axis as her millionaire husband Marcus stood before her, his face cold and distant in a way she'd never seen before. "What did you say?" she whispered, her free hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. Marcus Brennan, 37 years old and devastatingly handsome in his custom Italian suit, didn't even have the decency to look apologetic. His dark eyes, which once gazed at her with what she thought was love, now held nothing but calculated indifference. "You heard me correctly. I'm leaving you for someone else. Someone younger, more compatible with my lifestyle." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope. "The divorce papers are already prepared. My attorney has been quite thorough." Victoria's legs nearly gave out beneath her. 8 months pregnant with their first child, she'd been planning this evening for weeks. She'd made reservations at Chez Laurent, the upscale French restaurant where they'd had their first date 3 years ago. She'd worn the emerald green dress he'd bought her last Christmas, the one that made her eyes sparkle. She'd imagined his face when she told him about the baby, about how their family would be complete. Instead, she was holding divorce papers while her cheating husband destroyed everything she'd believed about their marriage. "There's someone else." The question escaped her lips before she could stop it, though part of her already knew the answer. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the way he'd grown distant over the past few months, all of it suddenly made horrifying sense. "Her name is Amber Collins. She's 25, beautiful, and understands what a man like me needs." Marcus's voice carried a cruel satisfaction that made Victoria's stomach churn. "She works at Chez Laurent. Actually, I thought it would be appropriate to tell you there, considering that's where this all began." The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. The restaurant where they'd fallen in love would now be the site of their marriage's destruction. She felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. "Marcus, I'm 8 months pregnant with your child. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Her voice cracked despite her efforts to stay strong. He shrugged, the gesture so casual it felt like a slap. "Children are expensive, Victoria, and frankly, I'm not ready for that kind of commitment. Amber and I have discussed it, and we've decided we want to travel. Enjoy life while we're young." "While you're young?" Victoria couldn't hide her shock. "You're 37 years old, and I'm carrying your baby." Biology is inconvenient sometimes," Marcus replied with stunning callousness. "But my attorney assures me that with the prenuptial agreement we signed, my obligations will be minimal." Victoria remembered signing that prenuptial agreement 3 years ago, back when she was desperately in love and trusted Marcus completely. She'd been so naive, believing his explanation that it was just a formality his lawyers required. Now she realized it had been a trap from the very beginning. "I want you moved out by the end of the week," Marcus continued, checking his expensive Rolex as if this conversation was keeping him from something important. "Amber will be moving in on Saturday." The casual cruelty of it took Victoria's breath away. "You're bringing her to our home, to the nursery we painted together. It's my home. Victoria, check the deed if you need a reminder." His smile was cold and victorious. "Your name isn't on anything that matters." As the full scope of her situation became clear, Victoria felt something deep inside her begin to break. Not just her heart, that had shattered the moment he said he was leaving. Something deeper. The trusting, optimistic part of her that had believed in fairy tales and happy endings. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you marry me if you never loved me?" Marcus's laugh was bitter and ugly. "Love, Victoria. You were convenient. A small-town girl with a modest trust fund and no family to interfere. You were supposed to be grateful, manageable. But lately, you've become—" He gestured at her pregnant form with distaste. "Complicated." The modifier hit her like a physical blow. He'd married her because he thought she'd be easy to control, easy to discard when something better came along. Her modest trust fund, the small monthly payments she received from her family's investments, had been part of his calculation all along. "I trusted you," she said, her voice barely audible. "That was your mistake." Marcus glanced at his watch again. "I have dinner reservations with Amber at 8. I trust you can see yourself out." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Victoria, don't even think about trying to take me for everything in the divorce. I've had the best lawyers money can buy working on this for months. You'll get exactly what the prenuptial agreement allows, which isn't much. With that final, devastating blow, Marcus Brennan walked out of their penthouse, leaving Victoria standing alone in the marble foyer of what she'd thought was their home, holding divorce papers and the ultrasound photo of their unborn daughter. As the door closed behind him with a soft click, Victoria finally allowed herself to break. The tears came in great, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. She sank into the nearest chair, clutching her belly as if she could somehow protect her baby from the emotional devastation surrounding them both. But even as she cried, something else was awakening inside Victoria Sterling. Something that had been sleeping for far too long. Something that Marcus Brennan had just made the fatal mistake of underestimating. Because while Marcus thought he'd married a naive small-town girl with a modest trust fund, he'd actually married the sole heir to the Sterling Hotel empire, a $2 billion fortune he didn't even know existed. And Victoria Sterling was about to remind him that the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. Victoria sat in the marble foyer for what felt like hours, though the grandfather clock in the hallway told her only 20 minutes had passed since Marcus walked out. 20 minutes since her life imploded. 20 minutes since she learned that her millionaire husband had been planning her destruction for months, while she lovingly prepared a nursery for their child. The divorce papers lay scattered around her feet where she'd dropped them. She forced herself to pick them up, to read through the legal language that would strip away everything she'd thought was hers. Marcus had been thorough and cruel. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed in trusting love 3 years ago was airtight. She would receive a modest settlement, barely enough to support herself and the baby for a year. The penthouse, the cars, the vacation home in the Hamptons, all of it belonged solely to Marcus, or so he thought. Victoria pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a year. It rang twice before a crisp, familiar voice answered. Eleanor Sterling speaking. Grandmother, it's Victoria. Her voice broke on the words. I need help. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. Eleanor Sterling, at 64, was one of the most powerful women in the hospitality industry, though she kept a deliberately low profile. The Sterling Hotel empire spanned 4 continents, but Eleanor had always preferred to let others take the spotlight while she controlled the empire from behind the scenes. What's happened, darling? Eleanor's voice immediately shifted from business crisp to protective warmth. Marcus is leaving me. He's been having an affair with a 25-year-old waitress, and he's served me with divorce papers. I'm 8 months pregnant, and he doesn't want the baby. The words tumbled out in a rush, followed by fresh tears. I'm coming over immediately. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And don't leave that penthouse until I arrive. Do you understand me? Yes, but grandmother. No buts. Victoria, you've been hiding from who you are for far too long. It's time to stop playing the helpless victim and start being a Sterling. The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone. She'd spent 3 years trying to be the perfect wife to Marcus, never mentioning her family's wealth, living off her modest trust fund payments while billions sat untouched in carefully managed accounts. She'd wanted Marcus to love her for herself, not for her money. Now she realized how naive that had been. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Rebecca. How did the dinner surprise go? Did Marcus cry when you told him about the baby? Victoria stared at the message, unable to formulate a response. How could she explain that instead of happy tears? Marcus had handed her divorce papers, that instead of celebrating their growing family, he was moving his mistress into their home. Before she could respond, the penthouse door opened, and Marcus walked back in. Victoria's heart leaped with desperate hope. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he realized what he was throwing away. That hope died when Amber Collins walked in behind him. She was everything Victoria wasn't. Young, thin, blonde, and wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blue eyes surveyed the penthouse with obvious satisfaction, as if she was already planning how to redecorate. Victoria, I'd like you to meet Amber, Marcus said with casual cruelty. Amber, this is my soon-to-be ex-wife. Amber's smile was predatory. Marcus has told me so much about you, It's so sad when marriages don't work out, especially when there are children involved. The false sympathy in her voice made Victoria's blood boil. This woman, this girl, had knowingly pursued a married man and was now standing in Victoria's home, already claiming it as her own. "Get out," Victoria said quietly. "Excuse me." Amber's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "I said get out. Both of you. This is still my home until the divorce is final." Marcus stepped forward, his face darkening with anger. "Actually, Victoria, it's not. The lease is in my name. The deed is in my name, and you have no legal right to be here. I'm being generous by giving you until the end of the week." "Generous?" Victoria struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. "You call destroying our marriage and abandoning your unborn child generous?" "I call it practical," Marcus replied coldly. "You're not the woman I married. Victoria, you've become demanding, emotional, and frankly, the pregnancy has made you less attractive." Amber giggled at his cruel words, linking her arm through his possessively. "Don't worry, baby. Some women just don't know how to take care of themselves during pregnancy." Victoria felt something snap inside her chest. Not break. She'd already broken in the foyer. This was different. This was the sound of her patience, her kindness, her willingness to be walked on, finally reaching its limit. "You know what, Marcus? You're absolutely right. I'm not the woman you married." Victoria's voice grew stronger with each word. "The woman you married was naive enough to believe your lies. She was trusting enough to sign a prenuptial agreement without reading it carefully. She was foolish enough to think that love conquers all." She moved closer, ignoring the way Amber instinctively stepped back. "But that woman is gone, and the woman standing here now, she's about to become your worst nightmare." Marcus laughed, but there was something uncertain in his eyes. "Is that supposed to be a threat? You have no money, no connections, no power? What exactly are you going to do?" Victoria smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt genuinely happy. "You're about to find out." The sound of the elevator opening interrupted the tense standoff. Eleanor Sterling emerged, elegant and commanding in her perfectly tailored Chanel suit. At 64, she moved with the confidence of a woman who had built an empire and wasn't about to let anyone threaten what was hers. "Victoria, darling," Eleanor said, crossing the room to embrace her granddaughter. "I came as soon as I could." Marcus frowned, studying Eleanor with growing confusion. There was something familiar about her, something that nagged at the edge of his recognition. "And you must be Marcus," Eleanor continued, turning to face him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've heard so much about you, though I must say, the reality is rather disappointing." "I'm sorry, who are you exactly?" Marcus demanded, his authority clearly threatened by this woman's commanding presence. Eleanor's smile grew sharper. "I'm Eleanor Sterling, Victoria's grandmother." The color drained from Marcus's face as recognition finally hit. Eleanor Sterling. The Eleanor Sterling. The woman who had built one of the world's largest hotel empires from nothing. The woman whose net worth was estimated in the billions, though she kept her exact fortune carefully hidden from public scrutiny. Amber looked between them in confusion, clearly not understanding the significance of the name, but Marcus understood. Oh, he understood perfectly. "Sterling," he whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "Victoria Sterling, not Victoria Mitchell from a small town in Ohio." "Oh, she is from a small town in Ohio," Eleanor said pleasantly. "She just happens to own most of it." Victoria watched with satisfaction as her millionaire husband realized he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd abandoned a billionaire heiress for a waitress, and he was about to pay a price he'd never imagined possible. "Now then," Eleanor continued, settling into the leather chair as if she owned the place, which, Victoria realized, she probably could if she wanted to. "Shall we discuss how this divorce is really going to proceed?" The silence in the penthouse stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the soft tick of the grandfather clock and Amber's confused whisper of, "What's happening?" Marcus stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions: shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally, a desperate kind of anger. "That's impossible," he said, his voice hoarse. "Victoria doesn't have that kind of money. I've seen her bank accounts. I've seen her trust fund statements. She gets $3,000 a month from some family investments. Eleanor Sterling's laugh was musical and sharp. Oh, my dear boy, you've seen exactly what we wanted you to see. Did you really think the Sterling family would allow our heir to marry without proper investigation? Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. Grandmother, what do you mean, darling? We had Marcus thoroughly investigated before you even brought him home for Christmas. We knew about his financial troubles, his wandering eye, his pattern of targeting women with money. Eleanor's gaze never left Marcus's increasingly pale face. The question was whether you'd be smart enough to see through him on your own. You knew, Victoria's voice rose. You knew he was using me and you said nothing. I hoped you'd figure it out before it went this far, but when you didn't, Eleanor shrugged elegantly. Sometimes we have to let people show us who they really are. Marcus found his voice, though it shook with barely controlled fury. You manipulated us. You set up fake accounts, fake trust funds. Nothing fake about them. Eleanor interrupted smoothly. Victoria's trust fund is quite real. It's simply the smallest of her many accounts. Tell me, Marcus, did you ever wonder why a woman with a modest trust fund could afford designer clothes, expensive jewelry, first-class vacations? Victoria remembered all the times Marcus had complimented her style, her taste in fine things. She'd told him the items were gifts from family, hand-me-downs from wealthy relatives. He'd been so eager to believe in her family's money that he'd never questioned the inconsistencies. The emerald necklace you gave her for your anniversary, Eleanor continued relentlessly. She already owned a better one. The vacation to Tuscany you thought was such a generous gift. She owns a villa there. The car you're so proud of buying her, she could purchase the entire dealership without checking her account balance. Amber finally found her voice. Marcus, what is she talking about? You said Victoria was just some nobody from Ohio? She is nobody, Marcus said desperately, but his conviction was cracking. She works as a freelance graphic designer. She shops at department stores, not boutiques. She's never shown any signs of wealth. Because she was trying to be the woman she thought you'd love, Eleanor said, her voice softening with genuine affection for her granddaughter. Victoria has spent the last 3 years playing small, hiding her intelligence, her ambition, her birthright, all for a man who was planning to betray her from the very beginning. Victoria felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. She had made herself smaller, dimmer, more manageable. She'd hidden not just her fortune, but her sharp business mind, her natural leadership abilities, her strength, all so Marcus would feel comfortable, superior, in control. The $3,000 a month, she said slowly, pieces clicking into place. That's not my trust fund. That's my allowance. A very modest allowance, Eleanor confirmed. Designed to see how you'd manage on a limited budget, how you'd prioritize expenses, whether you'd develop the discipline needed to run an empire responsibly. Marcus's face was red with rage and humiliation. You've been lying to me for 3 years. Everything about our marriage has been a lie. No, Victoria said, her voice growing stronger. I loved you. That was real. The woman you fell in love with was real. The only lie was believing that you could love me for who I am instead of what I could give you. And what exactly can you give me? Marcus demanded, his businessman's mind already calculating. If you're really as wealthy as she claims, then the prenuptial agreement protects nothing, Eleanor finished smoothly. Did you think the Sterling family lawyers would allow their heir to sign away her birthright? Every document you've signed, every agreement you've made, has been carefully crafted to protect Victoria's interests. Victoria stared at her grandmother in shock. The prenuptial agreement, null and void the moment you conceive a child, a clause your husband's attorneys somehow missed in their eagerness to strip you of your imaginary assets. Eleanor's smile was razor-sharp. Amazing how the best lawyers money can buy can overlook the most important details when they're not actually the best lawyers money can buy. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face went from red to white as he realized the scope of his miscalculation. James Whitfield has been handling the Sterling family legal affairs for over 20 years, Eleanor continued. He's been monitoring your divorce proceedings with great interest, particularly the parts where you've attempted to hide assets and manipulate financial records. James Whitfield, Marcus whispered. Whitfield was legendary in legal circles, known for representing only the wealthiest families and never losing a case. He'll be joining us shortly to discuss the real terms of your divorce, Eleanor said. Terms that will ensure Victoria and her child are properly provided for, while ensuring you receive exactly what you deserve. Amber tugged on Marcus's sleeve, her voice high with panic. Marcus, maybe we should leave. This is getting complicated, and I don't understand what's happening. Victoria looked at the young woman who had helped destroy her marriage and felt something unexpected. Pity? Amber had been used just as much as Victoria had, though she'd been a willing participant in the deception. Amber, Victoria said gently, you should know that Marcus is broke. His company is leveraged to the point of bankruptcy. The lifestyle he's promised you, the wealth he's claimed, it doesn't exist. That's not true, Amber protested, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. Ask him about the creditors calling his office. Ask him about the investors threatening to pull funding. Ask him why he really needs a quick divorce settlement. Victoria's voice remained calm, but her words hit their target with surgical precision. Marcus's silence was damning. Amber stared at him with growing horror as the pieces of her own puzzle began falling into place. You told me you were worth millions, she whispered. You said once the divorce was final, we'd travel the world. You promised me a life of luxury. I will be worth millions, Marcus said desperately. Once I get my settlement from Victoria. There is no settlement, Eleanor said with finality. There will be no payout, no division of assets, no financial rescue for your failing empire. In fact, by tomorrow morning, I suspect your business will find itself in considerably more difficulty than it's already experiencing. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Victoria realized she was seeing her grandmother in full CEO mode for the first time, and it was both terrifying and thrilling. You can't do this, Marcus said, but he sounded like a man grasping at straws. I have rights. I have contracts. You have what the Sterling family allows you to have, Eleanor replied. And after tonight, that's going to be considerably less than you might hope. The elevator chimed again, and James Whitfield emerged. He was a distinguished man in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed and carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never lost a legal battle. Mrs. Sterling, Victoria, he greeted them warmly before turning to Marcus with professional coolness. Mr. Brennan, I believe we have some documents to discuss. As James began spreading papers across the marble coffee table, Victoria felt the last of her old life falling away. The naive, trusting woman who had hidden her light to make her husband comfortable was gone forever. In her place stood Victoria Sterling, heir to a billion-dollar empire, and she was ready to claim everything that was rightfully hers. The penthouse had transformed into a war room. James Whitfield spread documents across the marble coffee table with the precision of a general laying out battle plans. Eleanor sat regally in the leather chair, her fingers steepled as she watched Marcus realize his world was crumbling. Victoria stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, feeling stronger with each passing moment. Let's begin with the prenuptial agreement, James said, his voice professionally neutral despite the devastation his words would bring. The document you believe protected your assets actually contains several interesting clauses. Marcus leaned forward desperately. I read every word of that agreement. Victoria gets a modest settlement and nothing more. You read the version our junior associate prepared for your review, James replied smoothly. However, the document actually filed with the courts contains some additional provisions that become active under certain circumstances. What circumstances? Marcus demanded, though his voice suggested he already feared the answer. Adultery for one, abandonment of a pregnant spouse for another, deliberate concealment of financial troubles, fraud, and manipulation of joint assets. James's voice remained pleasantly professional as he delivered each devastating blow. You've managed to trigger all of them. Amber shifted nervously beside Marcus. Marcus, I think we should go. This doesn't feel right. No, Marcus snapped, his composure finally cracking completely. I'm not leaving until I understand what's happening here. 3 years ago, I married a small-town graphic designer with a modest trust fund. Now you're telling me she's some kind of billionaire heiress. Not some kind of, Eleanor corrected mildly. She is the sole heir to the Sterling Hotel empire. The trust fund you've been so fascinated by represents approximately 0.01% of her actual net worth. Victoria turned from the window, studying the man she'd loved for 3 years. Did you ever love me, Marcus? Even a little. His silence was answer enough, but he provided words anyway. I thought I did. You were beautiful, sweet, manageable. You seemed grateful for my attention, my gifts, my lifestyle. Grateful, Victoria repeated softly. You wanted a grateful wife, not an equal partner. I wanted a wife who understood her place, Marcus shot back, his mask of sophistication finally slipping to reveal the entitled, narcissistic man beneath. Not some princess hiding her fortune and making me look like a fool. You did that all by yourself, Eleanor observed dryly. Speaking of looking like a fool, James, perhaps you should show him the photographs. James produced a manila folder and spread its contents across the table. Victoria's breath caught as she recognized restaurant receipts, hotel bills, jewelry store records, all documenting Marcus's affair with Amber. We've been documenting your relationship for the past 6 months, James explained to Marcus's horrified face. Every dinner, every hotel room, every expensive gift you've bought with joint account funds, funds that legally belong to Victoria. You had us followed, Amber whispered, her face pale. We had Marcus followed, Eleanor corrected. You just happened to be there for the more recent documentation. Though I must say, the photos from the Ritz-Carlton last weekend are particularly illuminating. Victoria felt a stab of pain as she realized her husband had been with another woman while she was having pregnancy complications and needed him most. But the pain was quickly replaced by a cold, focused anger that felt surprisingly empowering. There's more, James continued, producing another set of documents. Marcus, your business partners might be interested to learn about your creative accounting methods, particularly the way you've been using Victoria's trust fund payments to secure loans under false pretenses. Marcus went dead white. You can't prove that. Actually, we can. When you listed Victoria's trust fund as collateral for your latest development loan, you committed several felonies, wire fraud, bank fraud, and falsification of financial documents. Just to start. I never, Marcus began, then stopped, clearly realizing he was only making things worse. Oh, but you did, Eleanor said pleasantly. Did you think we wouldn't notice when you started using sterling money to prop up your failing empire? Every transaction involving our funds is monitored. Darling, Victoria felt the pieces clicking into place. That's why you were so interested in my trust fund statements. You weren't planning our future. You were stealing my money to save your business. I was being resourceful, Marcus said desperately. Married couples share assets. What's yours is mine. What's mine was never yours, Victoria replied, her voice steady and cold. And what's yours is about to become nothing at all. James cleared his throat. Speaking of nothing, Marcus, you should know that several of your major investors received some interesting information today. Information about your true financial status, your fraudulent loan applications, and your tendency to abandon pregnant wives for younger women. You can't do that, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's libel, slander. It's public record, Eleanor interrupted. Your divorce filing is public record. Your loan applications are reviewed by multiple institutions. Your arrest record will be public record very shortly. Arrest record, Amber squeaked. Wire fraud is a federal crime, James explained gently, as if he were discussing the weather. The FBI takes a very dim view of people who manipulate financial institutions with falsified documents. Victoria watched her husband's face cycle through denial, anger, and finally, desperate calculation. She could practically see the wheels turning as he tried to find an angle, a way to turn this disaster to his advantage. Wait, Marcus said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone that made Victoria's skin crawl. Victoria, we can work this out. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we're having a baby together. Surely that means something. It means our child deserves better than a father who's a criminal, Victoria replied without hesitation. I'm not a criminal. I'm a businessman who made some aggressive choices. With your family's resources, we could build something amazing together. Think about it. The Sterling Hotel empire combined with my development expertise. The audacity of it took Victoria's breath away. You're asking me to fund your failing business while you continue your affair with your girlfriend? Amber and I? That's over, Marcus said, not even glancing at the woman beside him. She was a momentary lapse in judgment. You're my wife, the mother of my child. We belong together. Amber stared at him in shock and growing fury. A momentary lapse. You told me you loved me. You said we were going to build a life together. I said what you needed to hear, Marcus snapped, his desperation making him cruel. Did you really think I'd choose a waitress over a billionaire heiress? The sound of Amber's palm connecting with Marcus's cheek echoed through the penthouse. Victoria found herself almost admiring the younger woman's spirit, even as she felt sorry for her. You're despicable, Amber said, tears streaming down her face. You used both of us. And now he'll pay for it, Eleanor said with satisfaction. James, I believe it's time to discuss the criminal charges. Wait, Marcus said desperately. Victoria, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. Your family has influence. They could make these charges disappear. We could start over. Do things right this time. Victoria looked at this man she'd loved, this man who had betrayed her in every possible way, and felt nothing but contempt. Marcus, there is no we anymore. There's me, my child, and my family. You're just a mistake I'm about to correct. You can't destroy me over one affair, Marcus pleaded. It would be different if you actually loved me. But this was all an act, wasn't it? You were never really in love with me. You were just playing a role. The accusation hit deeper than Victoria expected, because there was a grain of truth in it. She had been playing a role, hiding her true self. But her love had been real, even if her presentation hadn't been. You're right, she said quietly. I wasn't being my authentic self. I was being the woman I thought you wanted me to be. Small, grateful, dependent. But my love for you was real, even if everything else was performance. Then give me another chance, Marcus begged. Let me prove I can love the real you. Victoria felt Eleanor and James watching her, felt the weight of this moment. This was her choice. She could choose forgiveness, could try to rebuild their marriage on a foundation of truth. Part of her, the part that still remembered loving him, almost considered it. Then she felt her baby kick, strong and insistent, and remembered that this wasn't just about her anymore. The real me wouldn't tolerate a man who commits crimes, abandons his pregnant wife, and only wants reconciliation when he discovers she has money, Victoria said with finality. The real me deserves better, and so does my daughter. Marcus's face crumpled as he realized he'd lost everything. Not just Victoria's love, but his freedom, his business, his future. Everything he'd built, everything he'd schemed for, was about to disappear. This isn't over, he said, his voice carrying a threat that made Eleanor's eyes narrow dangerously. Oh, but it is, she replied softly. You just don't know it yet. As if summoned by her words, the elevator chimed again. 2 men in dark suits emerged, their badges identifying them as federal agents. Victoria Sterling was about to watch her millionaire husband discover that threatening a Sterling came with consequences he'd never imagined. Marcus Brennan. The taller of the 2 federal agents stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of law enforcement. I'm Agent Rodriguez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. You're under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and falsification of federal documents. The color drained from Marcus's face as the agent continued reading his Miranda rights. Amber backed away from him as if he'd suddenly become radioactive, her face a mask of horror and betrayal. This is harassment, Marcus said, his voice shaky but defiant. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can, Agent Rodriguez replied calmly. Your wife's family has been very helpful in providing documentation of your fraudulent use of Sterling funds. Victoria watched with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists. The man she'd loved for 3 years was a stranger, and that stranger was a criminal. Victoria, Marcus called out desperately as the agents prepared to lead him away. Don't let them do this. You know I'm not a bad person. I just made some poor decisions. Poor decisions? Victoria's voice was steel. You committed federal crimes using my money while planning to abandon me and our unborn child. Those aren't poor decisions. Marcus, That's who you really are. As the elevator doors closed on Marcus and the federal agents, silence settled over the penthouse. Amber stood frozen in the middle of the room, mascara streaming down her cheeks, looking lost and broken. "I didn't know," she whispered. "He told me his divorce was already in progress, that his wife had been cold and distant for months. He said she was trying to take everything from him out of spite." Eleanor studied the young woman with something that might have been sympathy. "How long had you been involved with him?" "6 months," Amber replied, her voice barely audible. "He seemed so sophisticated, so successful. He told me he was unhappy in his marriage, that he'd married too young to the wrong woman." Victoria felt an unexpected stab of pity for her husband's mistress. "He's very convincing when he wants to be. I believed his lies for 3 years." "But you're rich," Amber said, confusion clear in her voice. "Why would you hide that from your husband?" "Because I wanted him to love me for myself, not for my money," Victoria replied. "Ironic, considering he only married me because he thought I had money, just not enough to matter." James cleared his throat. "Miss Collins, you should know that some of the gifts Marcus gave you were purchased with funds fraudulently obtained. You may want to contact an attorney." Amber's face went even paler. "Am I in trouble? I swear I didn't know the money wasn't his." "As long as you cooperate with the investigation and return any items that can be traced to the fraudulent accounts, you should be fine," James assured her. "Though you may want to distance yourself from Marcus's business affairs immediately." Eleanor stood and moved to the window, her expression thoughtful. "There's something else you should know. Miss Collins, Marcus's business empire is about to collapse entirely. His investors, his partners, his creditors, they're all going to be looking for someone to blame." "What do you mean?" Amber asked fearfully. "I mean that associating with Marcus Brennan is about to become very dangerous to your reputation and potentially your safety." Eleanor replied bluntly. "Wealthy men who lose everything often become desperate. Desperate men make dangerous choices." Victoria felt a chill at her grandmother's words. "You think Marcus might try to hurt someone?" "I think Marcus is about to discover that actions have consequences, and not everyone who loses money because of his fraud will be as civilized about it as we are." James gathered his documents efficiently. "The criminal charges are just the beginning. Victoria, your divorce will proceed quickly now that Marcus is facing federal charges. The prenuptial agreement is void, and you'll retain all your assets. More importantly, Marcus will have no claim to custody of your daughter." "What about his parental rights?" Victoria asked, one hand protectively covering her belly. "Convicted felons have limited custody options," James replied. "And given that he abandoned you during pregnancy and committed crimes using family resources, the court will likely terminate his parental rights entirely." The thought should have brought relief, but Victoria felt only sadness for her unborn daughter, who would grow up without knowing her father. Not because he was dead or absent, but because he was a criminal who had chosen money over family. "Miss Collins," Eleanor said, turning from the window, "I have a proposition for you." Amber looked up warily. "What kind of proposition? You're obviously intelligent. You're certainly beautiful. And despite your poor judgment in men, you seem to have a good heart. How would you like a real job?" "I have a job," Amber replied defensively. "I'm a waitress at Chez Laurent." "You're a waitress who speaks 3 languages, has a degree in hospitality management, and has been wasting her talents serving overpriced food to people who barely notice you exist," Eleanor said bluntly. Victoria stared at her grandmother in surprise. How did she know so much about Amber? "You investigated her too," Victoria realized. "I investigate everyone who comes into our orbit," Eleanor replied matter-of-factly. "Miss Collins has been working multiple jobs to pay off student loans while supporting her younger brother's medical treatments. She started dating Marcus because he offered financial stability, not because she was a gold digger." Amber's cheeks flushed red. "You know about Danny. I know that you've been sending most of your earnings to help pay for your brother's leukemia treatments, and that Marcus promised to help with the medical bills." Eleanor continued. "I also know that he never intended to follow through on that promise." Fresh tears spilled down Amber's cheeks. "Danny's treatments are working, but the bills are crushing us. When Marcus offered to help..." She trailed off, shame coloring her voice. Victoria felt her anger toward Amber dissolve entirely. The young woman hadn't been a calculating mistress. She'd been a desperate sister trying to save her brother's life. "How old is Danny?" Victoria asked gently. 16. He's in remission now. But the treatments, they cost so much." Amber wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know what I did was wrong. I knew Marcus was married, but he made it sound like his marriage was already over, and I needed the money so badly." Eleanor moved to the desk and wrote something on a piece of Sterling Hotel's letterhead. "This is the name and number of our Director of Human Resources. Call her tomorrow and tell her I referred you. We have an opening for an assistant manager trainee at our Chicago property. The salary is $60,000 to start, with full medical benefits that would cover your brother's ongoing treatments." Amber stared at the paper as if it might disappear. "Why would you help me? I helped destroy your granddaughter's marriage?" "You were a victim too," Eleanor replied simply. "And I don't believe in punishing people for being desperate enough to trust the wrong person. But if you take this job, you work for it. I don't give handouts. I give opportunities. And yes, ma'am. Thank you." Amber clutched the paper like a lifeline. "I don't know how to repay you. By building a life you can be proud of," Victoria said, "and by staying far away from married men." After Amber left, the penthouse felt eerily quiet. Victoria sank into the leather chair, feeling emotionally and physically exhausted. The baby kicked restlessly, responding to her elevated stress levels. "Grandmother, why did you help her?" Eleanor poured herself a brandy from the bar cart. "Because she reminded me of someone I knew once, a young woman who made desperate choices because she was trying to save someone she loved." "Someone you knew?" "Me," Eleanor said simply. "I married your grandfather not for love, but because my family was drowning in debt and he offered financial salvation. The difference is that he turned out to be a good man who became the love of my life. Amber wasn't so fortunate." Victoria studied her grandmother with new eyes. "I never knew the family had financial problems." "We didn't have financial problems. We had financial disasters. Your great-grandfather made some spectacularly bad investments in the 1980s. When I married your grandfather, the Sterling name was worth more than the Sterling bank account. But you built the hotel empire together. We built it together, but it was my business sense and his engineering genius that made it work, plus a considerable amount of luck and some very strategic partnerships." Eleanor sipped her brandy thoughtfully. "The point is, Victoria, that people aren't always what they seem on the surface. Amber made terrible choices, but she made them for understandable reasons." Victoria nodded, thinking about her own choices over the past 3 years. "Like me hiding who I really was." "Exactly like that. The difference is that you've learned from your mistakes. Now you get to decide who you want to be going forward." As if summoned by her words, Victoria's phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca's name, and Victoria realized she hadn't responded to her best friend's earlier text about the dinner surprise. "Rebecca, hi." "Victoria, you sound terrible. What happened at dinner? Did something go wrong with telling Marcus about the baby?" Victoria took a deep breath and began to explain everything that had happened since her last conversation with Rebecca. By the time she finished, Rebecca was making sounds of shock and fury that would have been funny under different circumstances. "I'm coming over right now," Rebecca announced when Victoria finished her story. "Rebecca, it's almost midnight. I don't care if it's 4 in the morning. My best friend just discovered her husband is a criminal and her entire life has been turned upside down. I'm coming over, and I'm bringing ice cream and prenatal vitamins." Despite everything that had happened, Victoria found herself smiling. Prenatal vitamins. You've had the most stressful night of your life while 8 months pregnant. Your baby needs extra nutrition, and you need someone to make sure you're taking care of yourself. 20 minutes later, Rebecca arrived with a bag full of supplies, ice cream, vitamins, herbal tea, and a determination to take care of her friend that made Victoria want to cry with gratitude. "So," Rebecca said as she settled Victoria on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, "what happens next?" Victoria looked around the penthouse that had never really been her home, thought about the Sterling empire she'd been hiding from, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, excitement about her future. "Next, I stop pretending to be someone I'm not," Victoria said. "Next, I claim everything that's rightfully mine." 3 weeks later, Victoria stood in the Sterling Hotel's flagship property, looking out at the city from the 42nd floor executive suite that would soon be her office. The pregnancy complications that had started the night Marcus left had stabilized, but her doctor had ordered modified bed rest, which Eleanor had interpreted as executive meetings from the penthouse suite. The Sterling family's flagship hotel was a testament to luxury and power, all marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and breathtaking views. Victoria had spent 3 years living like a middle-class wife, while her birthright waited for her in gleaming towers of glass and steel. The quarterly reports show we're outperforming projections by 12%, James Whitfield said, spreading documents across the conference table. The Chicago property acquisition will complete next month, and the London expansion is ahead of schedule. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Excellent. And the Brennan situation? Marcus's assets have been frozen pending the criminal trial. His company officially filed for bankruptcy yesterday, and his investors are pursuing civil action for fraud. He's facing 20 to 25 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. Victoria felt a complex mix of emotions at the news. Relief that her daughter would be protected from Marcus's influence. Sadness that the man she'd loved had destroyed himself so completely, and a guilty satisfaction that justice was being served. What about custody issues? She asked. His attorney attempted to file for parental rights last week, but given his criminal charges and the evidence of abandonment, the motion was denied. The court agrees that he poses a danger to both you and the child. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood turn cold. What is it, darling? Eleanor asked, noting Victoria's expression. Marcus. He's asking to meet with me. He says he has something important to tell me about the baby. Eleanor's face darkened. Absolutely not. He's desperate and facing prison time. Meeting with him would be dangerous. But what if there's something medically important? What if there's some genetic condition he knows about that I need to tell my doctor? James shook his head. If it were genuinely medical, he could provide that information through his attorney. This is manipulation. Victoria. He's hoping to use the baby to get you to advocate for him. Victoria knew they were right, but part of her couldn't help wondering if Marcus had genuinely important information. Despite everything he'd done, they'd created a child together. What if I meet him somewhere public, with security present? Absolutely not, Eleanor said firmly. Victoria, you're 8.5 months pregnant. You're vulnerable both physically and emotionally. Marcus knows exactly how to manipulate your maternal instincts. Before Victoria could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. Don't answer it, Eleanor advised, but Victoria was already accepting the call. Hello, Marcus. Victoria. Thank God. I was afraid you wouldn't take my call. His voice sounded strained, desperate in a way she'd never heard before. James said you tried to file for custody rights. I need to see you. There are things about your pregnancy that you don't understand, things about our baby that could be dangerous. Victoria felt her protective instincts flare. What things? If there's something medically relevant, you can tell me now. Not over the phone. This is too important, too sensitive. Please, Victoria. 1 meeting, 1 hour. I know I don't deserve it, but this isn't about me. It's about our daughter. Eleanor was shaking her head emphatically, but Victoria felt torn. What if Marcus genuinely knew something that could affect her daughter's health? Where, she heard herself asking? The Sterling Hotel restaurant. Public, safe, neutral territory. Please, Victoria, if you ever love me at all, give me 1 hour to explain everything. Against her better judgment and Eleanor's obvious disapproval, Victoria agreed to meet Marcus that afternoon. The Sterling Hotel restaurant was indeed neutral territory, elegant, well-staffed, and equipped with discreet security that would ensure her safety. Victoria arrived first, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines and easy access to exits. Eleanor had insisted on stationing 2 security guards nearby, disguised as business diners. Marcus arrived exactly on time, and Victoria was shocked by his appearance. In 3 weeks, he'd aged years. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. His skin was pale and drawn, and his eyes held the desperate look of a man watching his world collapse. Thank you for coming, he said, sitting across from her with the careful movements of someone trying not to appear threatening. You have 1 hour, Victoria replied coolly. What's so important about my pregnancy that it couldn't be discussed through lawyers? Marcus leaned forward intently. Victoria, there are things about my family medical history that I never told you. Things that could affect our daughter. A chill ran down Victoria's spine. What things? My father didn't die in a car accident like I told you. He died by suicide when I was 12. He'd been struggling with severe depression and bipolar disorder for years. Victoria felt her protective instincts surge. Are you saying our daughter could have inherited mental health issues? It's possible. My brother Dylan has struggled with depression since his 20s. My grandmother was institutionalized for what they called melancholia back in the 50s. Marcus's voice cracked with what seemed like genuine emotion. I should have told you before, but I was ashamed. I was afraid you wouldn't want to have children with me if you knew. The information hit Victoria like a physical blow. Mental health issues were manageable with proper care, but they required monitoring, early intervention, genetic counseling, information that would be crucial for her daughter's future medical care. Why tell me now, she asked, because I'm facing prison time. And if something happens to me, if I die in there or... Marcus's voice broke. I couldn't live with myself if our daughter suffered because I was too proud to admit my family's problems. Despite everything he'd done, Victoria felt a reluctant stirring of sympathy. If Marcus was telling the truth, sharing this information could save him from years of prison time, but it could also be crucial for their daughter's health. Is there documentation, medical records? Some. My brother has copies of our father's psychiatric records, and I have our grandmother's commitment papers. I can have Dylan send everything to your doctor. Victoria studied Marcus's face, trying to determine if this was another manipulation or genuine concern for their child. The man across from her looked broken, desperate, but also somehow more honest than she'd seen him in years. There's something else, Marcus continued. Something about the night I left you. Something I need to explain. Marcus, please, just listen. He took a shaky breath. I had a complete psychological breakdown. The pressure from my failing business, the mounting debt, the realization that I'd built my entire life on lies. It all came crashing down at once. Victoria remained silent, watching him carefully. I know this doesn't excuse what I did, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was having panic attacks, not sleeping, making irrational decisions. When I found out about the pregnancy, instead of feeling joy, I felt trapped. The affair with Amber wasn't about love or even attraction. It was about running away from responsibility I knew I couldn't handle. Are you saying you had a mental health crisis? I'm saying I should have gotten help instead of destroying our marriage. I'm saying that if I'd been thinking clearly, I never would have chosen anyone over you and our daughter. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. I'm saying that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life, and I'll regret it until the day I die. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. If Marcus was genuinely mentally ill, if his actions had been the result of untreated psychological issues rather than pure malice, did that change anything? The fraud charges, she said carefully, were those also part of your breakdown? Marcus's face crumpled. Yes, I was making desperate decisions, trying to save my business, trying to prove I was worth something. I knew using your trust fund money was wrong, but I was convinced I could pay it back before you found out. I was convinced I could fix everything. But you couldn't. No, I made everything worse. I destroyed our marriage, betrayed your trust, committed crimes, and hurt the only woman I've ever truly loved. Marcus reached across the table as if to take her hand, then stopped himself. Victoria, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I've lost any chance of having a life with you. But please, for our daughter's sake, don't let my mistakes destroy any chance she might have of knowing her father. Victoria stared at this broken man who had once been her husband, feeling torn between compassion and caution. If Marcus was genuinely mentally ill, if his actions had been symptoms rather than choices, did he deserve a chance at redemption? What are you asking for? Leniency, a character reference for the court. Maybe supervised visitation once our daughter is born. If I can prove I'm getting treatment and staying stable. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back. I'm just asking for a chance to be the father our daughter deserves. Victoria felt her daughter kick strongly, as if responding to the emotional tension in the air. She thought about growing up without a father, about the importance of family connections, about the possibility of redemption and second chances. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. Marcus pulled out a business card. That's my brother Dylan's number. He can provide the medical records and verify everything I've told you about our family history. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused and looked back at Victoria with an expression of profound sadness and regret. For what it's worth, Victoria, I loved you. I loved you more than I'd ever loved anyone, and that terrified me. I thought if I could control the relationship, control you, I could control my fear of losing you. Instead, I guaranteed that I would lose you. After he left, Victoria sat in the restaurant for a long time, one hand on her belly, trying to process everything she'd learned. Mental illness, family medical history, the possibility that Marcus's actions had been symptoms rather than purely malicious choices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. How did it go? Victoria stared at the message, then typed back, I need to make some phone calls. She had a decision to make that would affect not just her own future, but her daughter's relationship with her father. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria wasn't sure what the right choice was. Victoria spent the next week researching mental health issues, consulting with psychiatrists, and speaking with Dylan Brennan about his family's medical history. What she learned was both heartbreaking and illuminating. The Brennan family had a documented history of bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety disorders stretching back 3 generations. Marcus's father had indeed died by suicide during a severe depressive episode, and Dylan provided medical records showing his own ongoing treatment for depression and anxiety. Marcus has been showing symptoms for years, Dylan told Victoria during their phone conversation. The grandiosity, the impulsive business decisions, the inability to maintain relationships. I tried to get him to see a therapist, but he insisted he didn't need help. Victoria found herself in an impossible position. Marcus's mental health issues didn't excuse his actions, but they did provide context. The question was whether that context mattered enough to influence her decisions about their daughter's future. Dr. Sarah Matthews, Victoria's obstetrician, reviewed the family medical history with professional concern. Mental health issues are hereditary, but they are also treatable with early intervention. What's important is that we monitor your daughter's development and have support systems in place if needed. What about the father's role? Victoria asked. If he's getting treatment, could supervised visitation be beneficial for my daughter? Dr. Matthews chose her words carefully. Children benefit from having involved, stable parents. If Mr. Brennan is genuinely committed to treatment and can demonstrate consistent mental health stability, limited contact might be possible, but that's a decision for you and the courts to make. Victoria was contemplating these conversations when Eleanor found her in the hotel's penthouse suite, staring out at the city skyline. You're thinking about giving him a second chance, Eleanor observed, settling into the chair beside her granddaughter. I'm thinking about what's best for my daughter, Victoria replied. Growing up without a father isn't ideal, especially if his absence is due to pride rather than genuine danger. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When your grandfather died, I was faced with a similar choice. Your father had made some terrible business decisions, had nearly bankrupted one of our subsidiaries through poor judgment, and what we later learned was undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Victoria turned to stare at her grandmother. My father had bipolar disorder. Among other things, the point is, I had to decide whether his mistakes disqualified him from running the family business or whether his illness explained behavior that could be managed with proper treatment. What did you decide? I decided that mental illness wasn't a moral failing, but that actions still have consequences. Your father got treatment, made amends for his mistakes, and eventually became an excellent CEO, but he had to earn that trust back through years of consistent behavior. Victoria nodded slowly. So you think I should give Marcus a chance to prove himself? I think you should make whatever decision allows you to sleep at night and look your daughter in the eye when she asks about her father. Before Victoria could respond, her phone rang. James Whitfield's name appeared on the screen. Victoria, you need to get to the hospital immediately. James's voice was tense with urgency. What's wrong? Is it the baby? No, It's Marcus. He's been attacked in jail. He's in critical condition at City General Hospital. Victoria felt the world tilt around her. Despite everything Marcus had done, despite her anger and hurt, the thought of him dying filled her with unexpected panic. "I'm on my way," she said, already reaching for her coat. Eleanor stood immediately. "I'm coming with you." The drive to City General Hospital felt endless. Victoria's mind raced with possibilities. What if Marcus died before she could tell him about her decision regarding visitation? What if their daughter grew up knowing her father had died in jail, branded as a criminal? The hospital's intensive care unit was stark and sterile, filled with the sounds of machines and hushed medical conversations. Dylan Brennan was already there, his face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "How is he?" Victoria asked immediately. "Stable but critical. He was attacked by 3 inmates who lost money in his business deals. They beat him pretty severely before the guards could intervene." Dylan's voice was thick with emotion. "The doctors say the next 24 hours will determine if there's any permanent damage." Victoria stared through the ICU window at Marcus, who lay unconscious surrounded by monitors and machines. His face was swollen and bruised beyond recognition, and tubes helped him breathe. This broken man bore little resemblance to the confident, manipulative husband who had destroyed their marriage. "Has he regained consciousness at all?" Eleanor asked. "Briefly, this morning." He asked for Victoria. Dylan turned to her with pleading eyes. "I know he doesn't deserve your compassion after what he's done, but he's my brother. He's the only family I have left." Victoria felt her daughter kick restlessly, responding to her elevated stress levels. "Can I see him?" The ICU nurse allowed Victoria 5 minutes at Marcus's bedside. Up close, the extent of his injuries was even more shocking. His breathing was labored, and machines monitored every vital sign. "Marcus," she said softly, taking his hand carefully to avoid the IV lines. "If you can hear me, I want you to know that I've decided to support your request for eventual, supervised visitation. After you're recovered, after you've gotten proper mental health treatment, we can discuss limited contact with our daughter." Marcus's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. "Victoria." His voice was barely a whisper through the oxygen mask. "I'm here. You need to focus on getting better. Our daughter is going to need her father to be healthy and stable." "I'm sorry," he managed to say, "for everything. I love you both." "I know," Victoria replied, and realized she meant it. "Now rest. Get better. We'll figure out the rest later." As she prepared to leave, Marcus squeezed her hand weakly. "The baby, is she okay? She's perfect, strong, just like her mother." Victoria managed a small smile. "She's going to be born into a family that loves her, including a father who's going to work very hard to deserve that love." Outside the ICU, Dylan waited with obvious anxiety. "Thank you for that, for giving him hope." "I'm not doing it for him," Victoria said honestly. "I'm doing it for my daughter. Every child deserves the chance to know their father, as long as that father is willing to be worthy of the privilege." Eleanor studied her granddaughter with obvious pride. "That was very mature of you, darling." It was the right thing to do. Mental illness doesn't excuse criminal behavior, but it does explain it. And if Marcus is genuinely committed to treatment and making amends, then our daughter deserves the chance to have a relationship with him. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Victoria felt a strange sense of closure. Her marriage to Marcus was over, had been over the moment he chose another woman over their family, but their shared responsibility for their daughter's well-being was just beginning. "There's one more thing," James said as they walked toward the exit. "Marcus's attorney has proposed a plea agreement. He would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for information about other financial crimes his business partners committed. He could be looking at 5 years instead of 25. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "As long as part of that agreement includes mandatory mental health treatment and supervised probation, I won't oppose it." "You're giving him a second chance," Eleanor observed. "I'm giving my daughter a chance to know her father," Victoria corrected. "What Marcus does with that chance is up to him." 2 days later, Victoria's water broke during a board meeting at Sterling Hotels. As Eleanor calmly called for the car and James gathered legal documents that might need signing, Victoria realized her daughter had impeccable timing. She was going to be born not as the child of a failed marriage, but as the heir to an empire, with a mother strong enough to protect her and a father who might yet earn the privilege of loving her. The Sterling family was about to welcome its newest member, and Victoria had never felt more ready to embrace her role as both CEO and mother. Charlotte Elizabeth Sterling Brennan entered the world at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, weighing 7 pounds, 6 ounces, and possessing her mother's green eyes and her grandmother's imperious cry that demanded immediate attention. Victoria held her daughter for the first time in the Sterling Hotel's private medical facility, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. "She's perfect," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her great-granddaughter. "Absolutely perfect." Victoria had never seen her grandmother cry before, and the sight made her own tears flow freely. "She's so beautiful, and so angry about being evicted from her comfortable home." "She's a Sterling," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "She knows quality when she experiences it." The private medical facility was luxurious even by Sterling standards. Private suites that looked more like five-star hotel rooms than hospital rooms, world-class medical staff, and security that ensured complete privacy for the family. Victoria had labored for 8 hours with Rebecca holding one hand and Eleanor holding the other, while James handled the constant stream of business calls that couldn't wait even for childbirth. "Has anyone contacted Marcus?" Victoria asked, still staring at her daughter's perfect features. "Dylan has been calling the prison medical facility every hour," Eleanor replied. "Marcus is stable but still unconscious. The doctors expect him to wake up within the next day or two." Victoria felt a complex mix of emotions at the news. She wanted Marcus to recover, wanted him to have the chance to see his daughter and begin the long process of earning the right to be her father. But she also felt relief that Charlotte's first days would be peaceful, without the complications that Marcus's presence would inevitably bring. "Mrs. Sterling." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "There are some reporters in the lobby asking about the baby. Something about a Sterling heir being born." Eleanor's face darkened. "How did they find out so quickly?" "Someone leaked it," James said grimly, checking his phone. "The story broke 20 minutes ago. Secret heiress gives birth to Sterling Empire heir is trending on social media." Victoria felt a chill of fear. She'd hoped to keep Charlotte's birth private, at least until she was ready to deal with the media attention that came with being a Sterling. "What do the stories say?" she asked. James's expression was grim as he read from his phone. "They're calling Charlotte the billion-dollar baby and speculating about her inheritance. There are also less flattering stories about Marcus and the circumstances of your divorce." "Let me see." James handed her the phone reluctantly. The headline made Victoria's stomach clench. "Pregnant heiress husband jailed for fraud while she gives birth to billion-dollar baby." The article detailed Marcus's crimes, his affair with Amber, and his current hospitalization after the prison attack. It painted a picture of a greedy man who had tried to exploit a billionaire heiress and gotten his comeuppance. "This makes it sound like I set him up," Victoria said undistressed. "Like I deliberately hid my identity to trap him." "The truth is more complicated than what fits in a headline," Eleanor replied. "But this attention was inevitable once you decided to claim your inheritance publicly." "I know, but I hope Charlotte could have a normal childhood, at least for the first few years." Eleanor's laugh was gentle but realistic. "Darling, Charlotte is heir to a $2 billion empire. She was never going to have a normal childhood." Before Victoria could respond, her phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "How are you feeling, Mama?" Rebecca's voice was warm with affection. "Exhausted, amazed, terrified, and incredibly happy," Victoria replied honestly. "Good. Those are all the right emotions. I'm in the lobby, but apparently I need special clearance to get up to your floor because of all the media attention. I'll have security bring you up immediately," Eleanor said, overhearing the conversation. 20 minutes later, Rebecca burst into the room with an armload of flowers and a face full of tears. "Oh my God, Victoria, she's gorgeous. She looks exactly like you did as a baby." "How would you know what I looked like as a baby?" "Because Eleanor showed me pictures while you were in labor. She was so nervous she kept pulling out photo albums to distract herself." Victoria looked at her grandmother with surprise. Eleanor Sterling. Nervous, it seemed impossible. "I was not nervous," Eleanor protested. "I was concerned about maintaining proper documentation of important family events." Rebecca grinned. She took about 300 pictures during your labor and kept asking the doctors if everything was proceeding normally. The image of her usually composed grandmother frantically taking pictures and pestering medical staff made Victoria laugh for the first time in hours. "There's something else," Rebecca said, her expression growing serious. "The story about Charlotte's birth isn't the only thing trending. Amber Collins gave an interview to a major magazine about her relationship with Marcus." Victoria felt her stomach drop. "What kind of interview?" "A surprisingly sympathetic one. Actually, she talks about how Marcus manipulated her, how he lied about his financial situation and his marriage. She also mentions the job Eleanor gave her and how it saved her family." Eleanor looked pleased. "Good for her, taking control of her narrative instead of letting others define her." "There's more," Rebecca continued. "She also talked about you, Victoria. She said that you had every right to destroy her life after what she did, but instead, your family helped her brother get the medical treatment he needed. She called you the most gracious woman she'd ever encountered." Victoria felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Choosing compassion over revenge had been the right decision, both for Amber and for her own peace of mind. "Any word on Marcus's condition?" Rebecca asked. "Still unconscious, but stable," James replied. "The prison is considering transferring him to a medical facility with better security. Apparently, the inmates who attacked him have made threats about finishing what they started." Victoria instinctively pulled Charlotte closer, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they all were. Marcus's crimes had created enemies who might blame his family for their losses. "Are we safe here?" she asked Eleanor. "Absolutely. Sterling Hotels has world-class security, and I've tripled the protection for this floor. No one gets near you or Charlotte without my express permission." As if summoned by their conversation about security, James's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, his voice too low for them to overhear. When he returned, his expression was grave. "That was the federal prosecutor's office. Marcus has regained consciousness, and he's asking to see Charlotte." Victoria felt her heart rate spike. "Now she's less than 12 hours old. He's also asking to speak with you about the plea agreement. Apparently, his near-death experience has given him some perspective on his priorities." Eleanor's expression was skeptical. "Or he's realized that playing the reformed father might help his legal situation." "Maybe," James acknowledged, "but his attorney says he wants to formally waive all parental rights until he's completed mental health treatment and served his sentence. He wants to ensure that Charlotte is legally protected from any potential backlash from his crimes." Victoria stared down at her sleeping daughter, trying to process this unexpected development. Marcus was offering to give up his parental rights entirely, at least temporarily, to protect Charlotte from the consequences of his actions. "What does that mean legally?" she asked. "It means you would have sole custody and full control over all decisions regarding Charlotte's welfare, education, and future. Marcus would have no legal standing to interfere with your choices, and no one could use him to try to influence or threaten Charlotte." It was exactly what Victoria had wanted, complete protection for her daughter from Marcus's chaos. But somehow, now that it was being offered freely, she felt conflicted about accepting it. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "Of course," James replied. "But Victoria, you should know that this offer probably won't stay open indefinitely. Marcus is facing serious legal consequences, and his willingness to cooperate now could significantly impact his sentence." Victoria looked at Charlotte's peaceful face and made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Set up a video call between Marcus and me. I want to hear this offer directly from him, and I want to understand exactly what he's proposing." Eleanor frowned. "Victoria, you've just given birth. You're exhausted and emotionally vulnerable. Are you sure this is the right time for legal negotiations?" "It's the perfect time," Victoria replied with quiet certainty. "Because right now, holding my daughter, I have absolute clarity about what's most important. And if Marcus is genuinely trying to protect Charlotte, I want to hear it from him directly." As James began arranging the video call, Victoria realized that in the space of 12 hours, she'd become not just a mother, but the sole protector of the newest Sterling heir. It was a responsibility that both thrilled and terrified her. But looking at Charlotte's perfect face, Victoria knew she was ready for whatever came next. She was a Sterling, and Sterling's protected what was theirs. The video call with Marcus was set up in Victoria's private suite 2 hours later. She sat propped up in bed with Charlotte sleeping in her arms, flanked by Eleanor and James, while a laptop screen showed Marcus in his prison hospital bed. The beating had left him almost unrecognizable. His face was swollen and bruised, one eye completely closed, and his arm was in a cast. "Victoria," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper through his damaged jaw. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. You said you wanted to discuss Charlotte's future," Victoria replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the shock of seeing his injuries. "I do, but first, I need to see her. I need to see my daughter." Victoria hesitated, then angled the laptop so Marcus could see Charlotte's sleeping face. The sound that escaped him was part sob, part prayer. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." "Yes, she is," Victoria agreed. "And she deserves better than having a convicted felon for a father." Marcus flinched at the harsh words but didn't argue. "You're right. She deserves better than me. Better than this whole situation. That's why I'm prepared to sign away my parental rights." James explained the basic terms. "But I want to hear this from you directly." Marcus took a shaky breath, the effort clearly painful. "I'm pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 7 years with mandatory mental health treatment. I'm also signing documents that temporarily terminate my parental rights until I can prove I'm mentally stable and financially responsible for at least 2 consecutive years after my release." Eleanor leaned forward. "What does temporarily terminate mean exactly?" "It means that for the next 9 to 10 years, I have no legal claim to Charlotte. Victoria has complete custody, complete control over all decisions regarding our daughter's life. I can't interfere, can't demand visitation, can't use Charlotte as leverage in any way." Victoria studied Marcus's battered face, trying to read his motivations. "Why would you agree to this?" "Because I love her," Marcus said simply. "Because I love both of you. And love means protecting the people you care about even when it costs you everything." "This is quite a change from the man who was planning to abandon his pregnant wife," Eleanor observed coldly. Marcus's remaining good eye filled with tears. "Getting beaten nearly to death gives you perspective on what matters. I've lost everything. My business, my freedom, my family. The only thing left that I can do right is ensure that Charlotte never suffers because of my mistakes." "What about when you get out of prison?" Victoria asked. "What happens then? If I can prove I'm stable, if I can show that I'm worthy of being her father, then maybe you'll consider letting me be part of her life. But that's your choice. Victoria, completely your choice." James cleared his throat. "There's another component to this agreement. Marcus is providing testimony against his business partners who were involved in the financial crimes. Several other people are facing charges based on his cooperation, including people who might hold grudges against our family," Eleanor added meaningfully. Marcus nodded painfully. "That's the other reason for the parental rights waiver. If I have no legal connection to Charlotte, then anyone looking for revenge against me can't use her to get to me. She's completely protected." Victoria felt Charlotte stir in her arms and looked down at her daughter's perfect face. Every decision she made now would shape Charlotte's entire future. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Anything," Marcus replied immediately. "You complete the full mental health treatment program, not just what's required for your plea deal. You get treatment for whatever underlying issues led to your crimes. The narcissistic abuse patterns, the manipulation, the financial irresponsibility." "Agreed. You pay restitution to everyone you defrauded, including the Sterling Family Trust Fund. Every penny, with interest." Marcus nodded. "My attorney is already working on the restitution calculations. And when you get out of prison, if you want any relationship with Charlotte, you start with supervised therapy sessions, not visitation, therapy, where a mental health professional can evaluate whether you're genuinely stable or just performing stability." That's fair," Marcus said quietly. Eleanor spoke up. "And if you violate any aspect of this agreement, if you attempt to contact Charlotte or Victoria outside the agreed parameters, the Sterling family will ensure you face the full consequences of your original charges." "I understand," Marcus replied. "And Eleanor, Mrs. Sterling, I want you to know that I'm grateful. You could have destroyed me completely, and you chose mercy instead. I didn't choose mercy, Eleanor replied crisply. I chose what was best for my great-granddaughter. Don't mistake strategic kindness for forgiveness. As the call ended, Victoria felt a strange sense of closure. The man who had betrayed her was taking responsibility for his actions and protecting their daughter in the only way he could. It wasn't the ending she'd dreamed of when she married him, but it was an ending she could live with. Are you comfortable with this arrangement? James asked. I'm comfortable knowing that Charlotte will grow up safe from Marcus's chaos, but with the possibility of knowing her father if he proves himself worthy of that privilege, Victoria replied. Rebecca, who had been quietly observing from the corner, spoke up. What happens now? Do you go back to the penthouse? Victoria looked around the luxurious hospital suite, then at Eleanor. Actually, I think it's time I moved into the Sterling family residence. Charlotte should grow up surrounded by family, and I need to start learning how to run the hotel empire. Eleanor's smile was radiant. I was hoping you'd say that. The family estate has been waiting for its next generation. Over the next few weeks, as Victoria recovered from childbirth and Marcus began serving his sentence, the media attention gradually died down. The story of the billionaire heiress and her criminal husband became old news, replaced by fresher scandals and newer dramas. Amber Collins thrived in her new position at Sterling Hotel Chicago, sending Victoria regular updates about her brother's improving health and her own growing confidence in the hospitality industry. True to Eleanor's assessment, she proved to be intelligent, hardworking, and grateful for the opportunity to rebuild her life. Marcus's business partners were convicted on various fraud charges, some receiving longer sentences than Marcus due to their lack of cooperation. The Sterling family's strategic acquisition of Marcus's debts meant they controlled the liquidation of his assets, ensuring that victims of his fraud were compensated while the family recouped their losses. Most importantly, Charlotte thrived. She was a healthy, alert baby who seemed to study the world around her with the same intensity her great-grandmother brought to business negotiations. Eleanor doted on her shamelessly, while Victoria learned to balance motherhood with the gradual assumption of her responsibilities as heir to the Sterling Empire. She's going to be formidable, Eleanor observed one afternoon as they watched 6-week-old Charlotte track the movement of her mobile with laser focus. She's going to be loved, Victoria replied. Everything else is secondary. As Victoria looked at her daughter and thought about the future, she realized that Marcus's betrayal, devastating as it had been, had given her something invaluable: the courage to claim her true identity and the wisdom to distinguish between love and manipulation. Charlotte Elizabeth Sterling Brennan would grow up knowing her worth, surrounded by women who had built empires and fought battles, protected by wealth and power, but grounded in love and integrity. It wasn't the life Victoria had planned, but it was infinitely better than the life she'd been settling for. 6 months after Charlotte's birth, Victoria stood in the Sterling Hotel's boardroom, her daughter sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside the conference table while she presented her vision for the company's future. The image would have been impossible to imagine a year ago, Victoria hiding her intelligence and ambition to please a husband who was stealing from her family. But now it felt completely natural. The millennial and Gen Z markets are demanding sustainable luxury, Victoria explained to the board of directors, her confidence evident in every word. Our new eco-friendly initiative will position Sterling Hotels as the leader in responsible hospitality. Eleanor watched from her seat at the head of the table with obvious pride as Victoria fielded questions from board members who had initially been skeptical of the young heiress. In 6 months, Victoria had proven herself to be not just Marcus's abandoned wife, but a brilliant businesswoman in her own right. The preliminary numbers from our pilot program show a 23% increase in bookings among travelers under 35. Victoria continued. Guests are willing to pay premium rates for luxury that aligns with their values. After the meeting, Eleanor and Victoria walked through the hotel's lobby, Charlotte alert and curious in her stroller as guests and staff greeted them warmly. You've exceeded every expectation, Eleanor said. The board is ready to officially name you as my successor. Victoria felt a thrill of pride and accomplishment. Are you ready to retire? I'm ready to be a great-grandmother who spoils Charlotte while her mother runs the empire. Eleanor replied with a smile. Though I reserve the right to interfere occasionally. As they reached Victoria's office, James appeared with an update that made them both pause. Marcus's first parole hearing has been scheduled for next month, he announced. He's completed the mental health treatment program and has been serving as a tutor for other inmates. His counselors say he's made remarkable progress. Victoria felt a familiar mix of emotions at the mention of Marcus's name. How much of his sentence will he have served? 3 years, which is typical for someone with his cooperation level and clean prison record. If he's granted parole, he'd be released into a halfway house with continued mental health monitoring. Charlotte chose that moment to wake up and demand attention, her imperious cry filling the office. Victoria lifted her daughter, marveling as always at how perfectly Charlotte fit in her arms. "What do you think?" Eleanor asked. "Are you prepared for the possibility that Marcus might be released soon?" Victoria considered the question carefully. The man who had betrayed her felt like a character from another woman's life. The woman she'd been, eager to please, willing to hide her true self, dependent on male approval, no longer existed. "I think Charlotte deserves the chance to know her father if he's genuinely changed," Victoria said finally. "But he'll have to prove himself worthy of that privilege." Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dinner tonight, I have news." Victoria smiled, remembering her best friend's mysterious excitement over the past few weeks. "Rebecca wants to have dinner tonight. She's been acting secretive lately." "Good," Eleanor said. "You need friends who knew you before you became a sterling CEO. They keep you grounded." That evening, Victoria met Rebecca at their favorite restaurant, not Chez Laurent, where Marcus had destroyed their marriage, but a cozy bistro where they'd celebrated promotions and birthdays and life changes over the years. "You look amazing," Rebecca said as Victoria settled Charlotte into a high-end baby carrier that allowed her to sleep through dinner. "Motherhood and power suit you. I feel like myself for the first time in years," Victoria admitted. "Who knew that becoming a single mother would be so liberating?" Rebecca grinned. "Speaking of liberation, I have news." David proposed. Victoria squealed with genuine excitement. Rebecca and David had been dating for 2 years, and he was perfect for her, kind, funny, supportive, and completely in love with Rebecca's independence and strength. "Tell me everything." What did he say? As Rebecca described the romantic proposal and showed off her elegant engagement ring, Victoria felt a deep happiness for her friend's joy. It also made her realize how much her own perspective on love and marriage had evolved. "Are you ever sad," Rebecca asked gently, "about how things turned out with Marcus?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "I'm sad about the time I wasted trying to be someone I wasn't. I'm sad that Charlotte won't have a traditional family, but I'm not sad about discovering my own strength or claiming my birthright." "What about love? Do you think you'll want to get married again someday?" "Maybe," Victoria said honestly. "But if I do, it will be to someone who loves me for who I really am, not for what I can give them or how well I can manage their ego." As if summoned by their conversation about love, Victoria's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Victoria Sterling. This is Dr. Michael Chen from the prison medical facility. I'm calling about Marcus Brennan." Victoria's heart rate spiked. "Is he hurt again?" "No, nothing like that. He asked me to call you about his parole hearing. He wanted you to know that he's not requesting any contact with you or Charlotte. He understands that his recovery is his responsibility, not your concern." "Oh," Victoria said, surprised by the message. "He also wanted me to tell you that he's proud of what you've accomplished with Sterling Hotels. He follows the business news and said to tell you that Charlotte is lucky to have you as a mother." After the call ended, Victoria sat quietly for a moment, processing the unexpected message. "Everything okay?" Rebecca asked. "Marcus is up for parole soon. He wanted me to know that he's not going to try to contact us. How do you feel about that?" Victoria looked down at Charlotte, who was sleeping peacefully despite the restaurant's noise and activity. "I feel relieved, actually. It means he's thinking about our well-being instead of his own wants." "That's progress." "It is. And it means I can focus on the future instead of worrying about the past." As they finished dinner and prepared to leave, Victoria realized that she'd built exactly the life she'd always wanted. Meaningful work, financial independence, a beloved child, and the freedom to be completely herself. The path to this life had been painful and unexpected, but the destination was everything she'd dreamed of and more. 6 months later, Victoria received a letter forwarded through James's office. The return address showed it was from Marcus, who had been granted parole and was living in a halfway house while working as a counselor for people with financial addictions. The letter was brief and humble. Victoria, I hope this letter finds you and Charlotte healthy and happy. I wanted you to know that I've completed 2 years of intensive therapy and have started working with people who struggle with the same issues I faced. My counselor says I'm ready to take responsibility for my actions without making excuses. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for contact. I just wanted you to know that every day, I'm working to become the kind of man who might someday deserve to know our daughter. If that day ever comes, it will be because you decide I've earned that privilege. Thank you for protecting Charlotte from my mistakes and for giving me the motivation to become better. Marcus. Victoria read the letter twice, then filed it away. Whether Marcus would ever be part of Charlotte's life remained to be seen, but she was glad to know that he was taking responsibility for his recovery. That afternoon, as she reviewed quarterly reports while Charlotte played on a blanket nearby, Victoria realized that her story had come full circle. She'd started as a woman hiding her true self to please a man who didn't deserve her. She'd endured betrayal, heartbreak, and the challenge of single motherhood, but she'd emerged stronger, more confident, and completely in control of her own destiny. Charlotte crawled over to her mother's chair and pulled herself up, babbling happily as she reached for Victoria's attention. At 10 months old, she was already showing signs of the sterling determination and intelligence. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Victoria asked, lifting Charlotte into her lap. "Ready to take over the world," Charlotte responded by grabbing Victoria's pen and attempting to eat it, making her mother laugh with delight. Outside the window, the city stretched endlessly, full of possibilities and opportunities. The Sterling Hotel empire was thriving under Victoria's leadership. Charlotte was healthy and happy, and the future held infinite potential. Victoria Sterling had learned that the most powerful revenge against those who underestimate you is not destruction, but success. She'd taken every attempt to diminish her and transformed it into fuel for her own growth. As Charlotte fell asleep in her arms, Victoria looked out at the empire she would someday pass to her daughter and smiled. The Sterling legacy would continue, stronger than ever, in the hands of women who knew their worth and refused to settle for anything less than they deserved. The heiress had claimed her throne, and she was just getting started.